Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Good morning. I'm so glad you're joining me. So today we're going to talk about how to know if it is time for a boundary or not. So first, let's talk about what a boundary is and what it isn't. For the purpose of this discussion, the definition of our boundary is not just a standard of a belief you hold that you won't waver on, because that's a really good thing. But for this discussion, we're calling a boundary something that is built to separate you from a person or relationship for a reason. Now, on the other hand, an unwavering belief is a good thing. And you need to have the courage to stand on your convictions and have a voice to speak from your heart. So, for the kind of boundary we're talking about today, let's decide if it's time for you to build one according to your circumstances, or if maybe you might have another option. So sometimes boundaries are built and relationships are pushed away because we're holding on to fear or unforgiveness or judgment or grudges. And in those cases, we must do relationship work first before we decide to put up a boundary. There was a time in the Word where a group of people would not let Israel pass through their border. They wouldn't let them cross their boundary line. So let's go talk about that for a moment. Now, the Edomites wouldn't let Israel pass through their land because they were afraid of them. So in Numbers 20, 18 through 21, you can read about it, that even though Israel said they would not take anything or cause any damage, the Edomites wouldn't let them through. So God held this against Edom, and you can read about it in the book of Obadiah. Because the Edomites were related to Israel, God expected them to stand by their brother Israel. And because they didn't, out of fear, and they did a lot of other things as well, things didn't go well for them. Now, Edom didn't just not let them pass through their border. They were also cruel in many ways, which showed their underlying attitude that they held against Israel in everything they did. So let's talk about when it is okay to build a boundary and to keep people on the other side of it. And then later we'll talk about how to build a boundary that can easily come down when the time is right, because sometimes we shouldn't build boundaries. Sometimes we should build short-term boundaries, and sometimes we should build long-term boundaries. So here are some questions to ask yourself before building a boundary. And if you say yes to any of these, you have work to do before you can build your boundary. Okay? So here we go. First, ask these questions. Are your feelings just hurt? If it's more than that, if your feelings are just hurt, then it's not time to build a boundary. There needs to be some healing first. Would a conversation help? If communication is too difficult with this person, would a mediator help? Are you holding on to unforgiveness that you need to let go? If that's the case, it's not time to build a boundary yet. You need to work on the forgiveness issues. Is it just a disagreement or a misunderstanding? If that's all it is, then it's time to communicate. It's time to get some help, and it's time to work through your disagreements. Do you need to be a light to this person? Do you need to be in that person's life and not build a boundary? Are you called to be in their life? That's a good question. Is this a standard in your faith that is threatened? If it's just a standard of your faith, can you stand strong? Or is there something that's getting in the way of you standing strong? Maybe this person can still be in your life, but just not your inner circle. Is there a way that this person could still be part of your life, but they're just not going to be your closest friends? These questions point out a time when a boundary might be beneficial. So these next questions I'm going to ask you are questions that maybe a boundary could help, but it should be maybe a short-term boundary. Are you personally in the way of them getting healing or help? If you are a stumbling block for them, then you might need to build a boundary. Is the boundary just going to be short-term, just to let them cool down a little bit? Have they held something against you and they just need to cool down? Then the boundary can just be a short-term one and you can have some healing after that. Have you already tried working it out and they aren't willing? Maybe it's time then for a short-term boundary till you can both work through your own issues. Is being around them a trigger for you to do or say things that you shouldn't? For example, are they drinking or a lot and you're tempted to join in with what they're doing? In that case, a boundary for your own protection would be wise. Now, these next questions are going to point out a time when an instant boundary must be built, okay? So if you say yes to any of these next questions, it's time for you to build an instant boundary. Are you or your children in danger? Physically, emotionally, or spiritually? If there's any danger at all, then you need to build a boundary. Or is that person purposefully causing problems for you without remorse or regret? If so, then you need to build a boundary right away. So let's go back and remember, if a relationship can be worked on first, if you can find good ways to communicate and you can deal with your issues, then it's not time for a boundary yet. You first need to work on relationships before you build a boundary. How do you do the work to avoid a boundary? First, you need to learn to stand up for yourself and your beliefs while still being kind and listening to others, because everyone needs a voice. And if you let others speak, most of the time they're going to let you speak too. If there's a need for a mediator, do it. Get one. Hold relationships in such high value in your life that you're willing to do the work necessary to keep them, to not lose relationships just because of hurt feelings or disagreements. It's really important that you hold your relationships in such high value that you're willing to communicate. You're willing to get a mediator. And if forgiveness is difficult, get help. It might be time for you just to work through your forgiveness issues. If you need to do that, go to my website, which is www.eileencjones.com. And under my courses at the top, or even there's another button that says Anointed to Soar, get yourself set up for an Anointed to Soar session, and we will help you through some of these boundary issues and some of your forgiveness issues. Make sure you're doing your emotional and spiritual work necessary so you don't have this hanging over your head. Boundaries don't always have to happen, but tomorrow we are going to talk about the steps when you do have to build a boundary. How are you going to do that? If it's a short-term boundary or a long-term boundary for your safety or for any of those other questions I talked about before, we're going to learn how to build a healing boundary. A boundary that can bring you to a closer relationship with your friends and family, and a boundary that can bring healthier relationships for you. All right, so go to EileenCJones.com, set up an Anointed to Soar session. They are buy one, get one this month for the month of December, because I want you guys who are having family communication issues to have something to work through and to be able to have healthier relationships this month. All right, so I hope all is well for you. I hope that was a blessing, and let me know what you think.